Why don't we start at the beginning? We'll read these first 7 verses because they're kind of a unit. These section divisions in the Bible, they're not really part of the Bible, but they can be useful. So the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. What does this say to you? Who has some thoughts on this or questions?
It just tells me I have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, we all do.
No, you're further down the trail.
It's hard to say. There are different kinds of wisdom, and there's knowledge and there's wisdom. And just like we all have different kinds of skill sets, I have a lot of knowledge in a very particular type of skills when it comes to information technology and computers.
Yeah.
But there are other things, baking, I know nothing about it.
Well, there you go. I've got it.
And there is definitely some wisdom to be learned there. Okay, to know wisdom and instruction, what's the difference between wisdom and instruction?
If you're wise, you can take instruction and apply it, is what it says to me. In other words, you can listen to all sorts of instruction, but that doesn't mean that you'll follow it.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard of the concept of musar?
I've heard the word.
Yeah, the word for instruction here in there and in actually it's in verse 8 that I was thinking of. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching. I was curious as to why it said those in 2 different ways, your father's instruction and your mother's teaching. What is the difference here? Well, if you look at the Hebrew words behind them, your father's instruction is musar, and your mother's teaching, or translated as law in the King James, is Torah. So, the word Torah, it literally means law, but it more literally, that makes sense, just means instruction. So the word can be used in both ways. It's not wrong to translate it as law because, when God gives rules for doing this or doing that, that is what a law is. But these are instructions for living. And so when your mother tells you how to live and, if somebody hits you, don't hit them right back. Be nice, share. These are all instructions of your mother. This is her Torah. But why does it say it's something different for the father? There's a Jewish discipline called Musar, and I can't remember how many points there are in it, but essentially you have a set of different characteristics. And for a period of time, you work on one characteristic at a time. And there's a specific way that you go about it. And the point is that you exercise a certain aspect of your character to try to bring it more in alignment with God. So that over time, as you go through each one of these character traits, you bring them all in alignment and you become, let's say you've got a series of windows. And if the windows aren't all lined up, then you can't see through them. You'll see through one window, but then you'll hit a wall. But Musar is the process of bringing all these windows in your character in alignment so the light of God shines through you into the world and isn't blocked by you. And this word Musar, even though it's translated here as instruction, the implication is that it is correction. It's not just telling you how to do something. It's correcting what you have already done. And this portrays your father as the disciplinarian. And just like all of the Proverbs, this is a principle. It's not that the father is always the disciplinarian and the mother is always the teacher. Father is the teacher also. Mother is also a disciplinarian. But this is the stereotype. And when it comes to Proverbs, stereotypes are very useful. to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity. What do these words mean? What do you think wise dealing means? Any ideas?
I'm cheating because I'm looking at the Strongs on my app too. So.
You would think it would be going back to the instructions of Yahweh and how you deal with people and things and
like interactions with the world.
Yes.
Okay. And it's not cheating to, look it up in a dictionary or look at Strong's numbers.
I see it says to make intelligent. I find it, and.
See, that was verse 5. A wise man will hear and increase learning. That's a very different translation than the English Standard has.
The ISR says the wise one hears and increase learning, and the understanding gets wise counsel, is how that is interpreted.
Okay, which translation was that?
That's the ISR.
Okay.
So you hear it and you increase your learning, and then
and then as you understand it,
you apply
whether through application or meditation.
Well, then that's like Shema, to hear and obey.
Yeah, there's not much point in hearing if you're not going to put it into practice.
It's the going in one ear and out the other for some.
Yeah, and there's what it says is the one who has understanding obtains guidance or wise counsel. I don't think it means understanding the knowledge necessarily. I think it's more about understanding in general, a characteristic of understanding. Someone who has an understanding of himself and the world can take knowledge and maybe figure out how to apply it, but that's not necessarily wisdom. That's how I lived most of my life, and I made some really bad mistakes. I thought that I was smart enough to figure out anything, and I was not. But it says the one who understands obtains guidance. So you can hear wisdom, and you can increase in all the learning you want, but you're going to need some counsel in order to apply it. You can't just, even if it's the scriptures, if you just read it and don't seek understanding from other people and advice on how to apply it, you could get yourself in a real bind. You could end up breaking relationships with other people.
Maybe that's how different denominations have developed, where they didn't seek anybody. They just went on their own, doing what was right in their own eyes.
So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. What does it mean for, we talked about what the fear of Yahweh is, but how is that the beginning of knowledge?
I don't know where else you would listen to first.
It's interesting what Strong says, the first, in place, time, order, rank, a first fruit. And Yeshua is a first fruit. So it's the beginning, is, when you first hear it, kind of start doing it.
Well, there are two ways to interpret that word, I think. One is you can start gaining knowledge if you have a fear of Yahweh. If you fear Yahweh, then when you have a question, that's who you go to. If you understand that he is all powerful, he has all authority, where else would you go? But it also means that it is the first in place or rank. Like it is the primary source of knowledge. And I think both of those are equally true. In this second part, fools despise wisdom and instruction. I think that this is meant to be obviously it's a contrast, but even though it uses different words, if you despise wisdom, you're not going to seek out the root of knowledge.
Right.
You're going to think that you know it yourself. And even people like, the way that I used to behave, thinking that I could figure it out. I thought that I was wise, but in reality, I was despising wisdom because I was not seeking out counsel.
And interesting, Jay, the word despise also means to disrespect.
Mm-hmm.
Which is exactly what you're going to do. It's disrespecting.
Yeah. It is the opposite of fear in the context of fearing Yahweh.
Exactly.
All right, so let's move down a little bit. Your father's instruction and mother's teaching are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. Why do you wear? I mean, it is graceful garland. It's in pendants. These are decorations. The garland, at least I think of like a Hawaiian lei, a ring of flowers around your neck. I don't think that's what is meant here. It's probably more like, a gold chain or something like that. Something beautiful in any case. But why would you want a garland for your head or pendants for your neck? And of course it says it's on your head too. So more like a crown probably. Why would you want those?
As a reminder.
Are they gifts from him?
Probably both of those, but a reminder for whom?
For yourself, of the Father.
Well, if it's on your head and around your neck, it's probably more visible to other people than it is to you. Just like wearing, if you're familiar with the tzitzit,
right.
The purpose of the tzitzit is to remind you to keep God's law, but it's more for the people around you than it is for you, so that they will be reminded to keep it when they see it on you. And I think in this context, it says, they're a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. Even though wisdom is not something that we're seeking in order to glorify ourselves, because that's kind of the opposite of wisdom, that is the end result anyways. People will see it in you, and they will either admire you for it if they are also seeking wisdom, or they will despise you for it and show themselves for who they really are. All right, so my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. Seems pretty straightforward. Let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. This seems pretty unreasonable. Like who listens to that kind of temptation?
Lots.
Yeah, unfortunately,
too many.
there are a lot of evil people in the world. And this really is about, it's when you're young is when you have an opportunity to not be this kind of person. If you don't listen to your father's correction when you were young and your mother's teacher when you were young, you're much more likely to end up in this kind of situation.
You want to fit in and be somebody else in somebody else's eyes, is what I would think.
Yeah. Let's see. We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. So the goal here is personal wealth. Gaining treasures for yourself. And whereas Solomon is saying that what you should really be trying to accumulate isn't wealth or power over other people, but wisdom and knowledge. And ultimately, wisdom and knowledge, it may give you power over other people and it may give you wealth, but it will make your life more fulfilling. Sorry, what was that?
That shouldn't be your goal,
right?
For money and wealth and.
Son, do not walk in the way of them. Their feet run to evil. Their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. We do see that today too, where there are kinds of people who are not just attracted to evil doing, but are eager to engage in it. And it's not necessarily that they are violent, although they certainly can be violent at times also. But the kind of people who are who despise wisdom are frequently also the kind of people who are eager to destroy that which is good. When I mentioned earlier about the garland on your head and the pendant on your neck, in the reaction that other people have to that, those people who fear God and seek wisdom will see that favorably. But those people who despise wisdom may take that as a temptation to attack. And we see that in our world every day.
And is it also, Jay, kind of like they do this, they're evil, they shed blood, etc., because that's their way of thinking that it shows them powerful, like in control,
To some extent, yeah. I mean, certainly some people are driven that way. I think for a lot of people, especially what we see in our world today, is people are just driven to destroy that which is beautiful and which reminds them of God. And I think it's about guilt.
Guilt. I never thought about that.
Yeah, they see things that remind them of God, and there is still that peace inside of them that is drawn to fear God and to keep his commandments, and that they have to suppress it. And one way they suppress it is by destroying everything that reminds them of that calling.
Well, aren't those two of the 7 things that God hates? Feet that run to evil and shedding of innocent blood?
Yeah, he certainly does. I can't remember the exact list.
Proverbs 6 is where it's at.
Right.
Yeah, there are 6 things that Yahweh hates, 7 that are an abomination: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that make haste to run to evil, a false witness who brings out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers.
Even before Torah became alive in my life, that scripture fascinated me, and I tried to memorize it, but I couldn't really.
Mm-hmm.
But what I wanted to do was not to do those things. And to my knowledge, the majority I have not. I may have had a haughty eye and I may have had a lying tongue, but I tried not to do the others.
Yeah, well, I think that at some level we all have that evil inclination. What Paul talked about is that, he knows what's right. He wants to do what's right, but there's always this urge to do the wrong thing. Yeah. And throughout our lives, we're always going to be struggling with that. We're always going to be working on conforming our character and allowing the Spirit to conform us more into God's image, especially into the visible image that we have in Yeshua. But in this life, we're never going to be perfect. That evil inclination is always going to be there, just pushing us to do the wrong thing at just the wrong time.
Right, because it speaks to thoughts as well as actions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Here's a section that I think is really important, and this goes to one of Solomon's 3 paths of wisdom, and this is living. Wisdom cries aloud in the street. In the markets, she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets, she cries out. At the entrance to the city gates, she speaks. So in a city like ancient Jerusalem, the city gates and the markets are essentially the same thing. There may be markets scattered around the city, but the biggest public market is going to be right there at the city gate, because the merchants don't, for the most part, they're not producing their goods in the city. They're farmers and craftsmen out in the countryside who harvest or produce their wares and bring it into the city, and they don't want to have to travel all through the whole city, navigating narrow streets or whatever. So they set up right there at the city gates. That's also where the city elders meet. It's where the city is going to have its court. So wisdom is there, and it's calling to people, but you have to go to it. You can't just sit in your library reading books about wisdom. You have to go into the marketplace. You have to go to the courthouse. You have to go where the people are, the noisy streets. This is another thing that runs counter to my character in a lot of ways. I'm kind of an extreme introvert. So this format of being on the internet and talking to a camera works better for me than standing in front of a group of people, because I just don't do well in front of people. So I have had to work very deliberately to put myself out there in the world and interact with people. It takes an effort, but it has to be done. I can't exist just sitting here in my house all day.
Well, that's the only way you can test it, right? Is to be around people, right? I'm the same way.
Yeah, you take the knowledge and the advice that you can read in Proverbs or in Torah or from any other source. But unless you get out there among the people, it's just head knowledge. It's not doing you any good. I'd be interested to hear some experiences from you about, what kinds of wisdom you've learned from just interacting with other people, especially in public spaces, not necessarily one-on-one. There's a temptation, if we go there's a temptation to start talking bad about people. But what kinds of things have you learned about human nature and about God just from being out in the public space, whether it's at work or in legal matters or at rallies or church or whatever? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I used to work in the church that we attended as the office manager, secretary, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And there were some people that had been put into position of what were called elders of that congregation. Mm-hmm. And I remember going up to one of the gentlemen and I asked him to teach me what to do. And in my observation of how everything happened, I learned what not to do from them.
Mm-hmm. In what way?
The way they would correct people, the way they would use their title, mm-hmm. the way they would, just the way they interacted and the way they kind of held themselves aloof. Mm-hmm. And I told myself that if I ever was in a position like that, that I would stay humble, that I wouldn't think myself better than somebody just attending. Mm-hmm. And I carried that through when I was driving bus. I carried that the same way. I just tried to help. I tried to stay connected to people, mm-hmm. not thinking I was better than they were.
If you don't mind sharing an example of that? I mean, I take it were you a city bus driver or for a school?
A transport. City bus driver. Yeah. Okay. Transportation, and then we did what was called dial-a-ride, where you would transport people to medical mm-hmm. appointments and such. And I think that was one of my most favorite parts, was helping those who couldn't help themselves. Mm-hmm. And helping them get to the places, and just, helping them realize that they were still somebody. Mm-hmm. Because some of them lost themselves in their disease, yeah. or their malady, and so I would just talk with them like, I don't know if others did, because it was usually just kind of one-on-one, mm-hmm. the driver and the passenger, but that was one of the things that I disliked when I decided to leave, because I had applied to be in the management, and that was the worst thing I could have done, because it took me away from people.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm sure that you met a lot of interesting people who were very grateful just for somebody who would listen to them.
They were, yeah. There were some good friendships that had developed, and when I left there, that's what I missed the most. Mm-hmm. But here we are.
Yep. All right. Does anybody else have an example of some way that they've learned some wisdom in the public sphere?
I learned that if you look people in the eye and smile, and like she was saying, because I was thinking about it as she was saying it. When you look at people in the eye and you smile and you show yourself, they seem to open up and are more apt to be friendly back instead of just closing everybody off.
Right.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, I was told, just because of my personal presentation, I guess, I used to work in a call center with maybe like 300 people out on the call center floor. A call center is like when you call somebody's customer service number, right, and it goes to some random person. So there could be anywhere from 100 to 1,000 people on a big open warehouse floor answering phones. And at this site, we had about 300 people on the phones. So I was IT. I was, supporting all the users, fixing computers. And one of my responsibilities was to get out on the call floor and walk around and just make sure that people knew I was there and talk to the supervisors. But nobody would ever talk to me. And I learned eventually that it was because everybody was intimidated because I was always scowling. And I had no idea. I just thought, this is the way people are. But no, it turned out it was the way I was. Okay, so moving on. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? Well, we know from watching the news that that still goes on today, almost 3,000 years later.
I think it's worse.
Yeah, it could very well be worse. When we've got so much free time, people in Solomon's day didn't have a lot of time for thinking and political protests.
No. Well, they didn't have the internet. They didn't know everybody's business like we can.
Yeah, they knew everybody's business who lived within a mile.
The luxury of being lazy and the luxury of being bad. We do now. Right.
Yeah, if you were too lazy in Solomon's day, you just starved.
Right.
Unless you were wealthy, and then maybe you could get away with it. But most people were not what we would consider wealthy. I mean, even Solomon, who was unimaginably wealthy in his day, didn't have anywhere near the luxuries that we do. He didn't have flush toilets. He didn't have electricity.
No air conditioning.
If you turn at my reproof, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded. Because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. So this is the voice of wisdom speaking here. The first part, if you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. And this is what it was talking about, the role of the father earlier. If you listen to your father's instruction, and that word is more about reproof and correction than about just teaching somebody. So wisdom, in this case, it's talking about making mistakes. If you heed my reproof, the reproof of wisdom is when something goes wrong, are you going to learn from it or not? Right. If you are willing to learn from it, then maybe you'll avoid that problem in the future. But if you don't learn from it, if you don't pay attention to what's happening around you, it's going to get worse. In wisdom, this personified wisdom is going to laugh at you. Not literally, of course, because it's not a real person. But it will certainly seem like it. The next few verses are pretty much along the same vein, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of Yahweh, would have none of my counsel and despised all my reproof. They shall eat the fruit of their way and have their fill of their own devices. This is in verse 29. They did not choose the fear of Yahweh. You think about fear as something that just happens to you. You're just afraid, like a phobia. But that's really not what's happening here. Now, I don't know if any of us are really born understanding God. I think probably when we're small children, we have a better understanding of him frequently than when we're old. For one thing, we have a personal experience with someone like God, at least in our own lives. Most of us do. You know, our parents are very much like God in that role. We are helpless, and our parents are strong and almost omnipotent from our point of view. And so we fear them. I can't remember, somewhere in here, I'm pretty sure it's in Proverbs where it talks about fearing your mother. And, you know, when you're older, you have to make a concerted effort to fear your mother. Your father, it's easier to fear because he's bigger and stronger. He's the disciplinarian in most families. Your mother is the comforter. But God still wants us to fear your mother because she has authority over you, and she has wisdom and power that you don't have, even if you don't understand what it is. And in this case, God is saying, you need to choose to fear me, because as we gain experiences and we live in the world, we start to forget that God is out there and is our creator and our lawgiver. And we start to see ourselves and our own problems in our world, even though we think our worldview is expanding and we're seeing more of the world, it's actually contracting. Our world is getting smaller and smaller and more focused on ourselves. And it takes a conscious effort to refocus outward on God and our community.
Yeah.
So we have to choose to fear Yahweh.
And he has given us that free will to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we do have that choice.
We have that choice whether or not we choose to fear him or not, which is awesome in itself.
Yep. And those who choose not to fear Yahweh, who despise wisdom and refuse to learn from their mistakes, they shall eat the fruit of their way. Everything we do produces fruit of some kind. You think about when Yeshua talks about a good tree produces good fruit, a bad tree produces bad fruit. This is one of the ways that we can choose what kind of tree we're going to become. We can choose to fear Yahweh and learn from our mistakes, moving more and more into his image and become a good tree that produces good fruit. Or we can choose to ignore that and not learn from our mistakes and continue to be a bad tree or become a worse one that produces worse fruit. And bad fruit is not just inedible, it can be poisonous to you and to the people around you. Bad decisions like that tend to be contagious.
I was curious, is this also like being like finally given over to your own heart and your own mind?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's a good observation. Like, Pharaoh, when Moses confronted him, he said, "I don't know this God." Essentially, he was refusing to fear Yahweh. And then when Yahweh revealed himself and said, "Here's what's going to happen if you don't fear me," Pharaoh refused to listen or to learn from his own mistake, and he chose not to fear Yahweh again. And so there came a point where he could no longer choose. God took that choice away from him, hardened his heart for him, and then he was stuck. There was no way out.
Right.
I was thinking of Pharaoh as well.
Mm-hmm. I had a pastor one time who described it as getting into a ring with a bear. You can choose to get in the ring, but once you're in the ring, the bear decides when the fight's over.
Oh, wow. That's good.
That was my biggest fear, to tell you the truth, is like if you don't start listening pretty soon, it's not going to be there anymore.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that seared conscience that can no longer hear God's voice.
Yeah.
We just have a couple of verses left to go in chapter 1. For the simple are killed by their turning away, and the complacency of fools destroys them. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. The turning away here, in Scripture, there's the concept of repentance or teshuvah, which means turning away or turning back. But in this case, it's not turning away from the mistakes, it's turning away from the voice of wisdom that's telling you to learn from your mistakes. And the complacency of fools. If you make mistakes, it takes effort to learn from them. You don't learn from them by just acknowledging that there was a mistake. You have to change something, and that takes some effort, and it takes some introspection that can often be painful. But if you take the easy route and just let life take its course, that complacency will come back and destroy you. I mean, there's always a choice to be made. And if you don't make it, life will make it for you, or God will make it for you.
Yeah, that turning away in the Strong says backsliding, turning away, apostasy.
I won't say every time, but many times, and especially tonight with reading of this, tears sting my eyes because of whatever I've done wrong, and I want to repent of that, or even for my children and their children's children. I want them to yearn for this. I want them to seek the ancient path. I want them to do that, but it has to be them that want to do it. And all I can help is show them.
I said, see it, it just seen it says noun feminine. I said, so that totally reminded me of the harlot.
Okay, and then this last verse. But whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. Now, the disaster is talking about here isn't natural disasters or even bad things that other people do. It's really talking about disasters that you create for yourself. If you learn from your mistakes and you gain wisdom and fear Yahweh, you are much less likely to cause disasters in your own life. And that really is what it comes down to with our children. I mean, we made mistakes when we were younger, and now we see our children making either the same mistakes or different ones. And, there's a temptation to just make the choices for them, but you can't, because then they'll never learn from it.
No.
And we hope that they will learn from whatever those mistakes are, and that they will ask for guidance while they still can. But without the disaster, how would we know that there's something to learn from? It's part of how God made the world to work.
Well, I was thinking about this, the people who, I know wisdom in a way gives you a chance to learn from other people's mistakes as well. You can observe what doesn't work and not go down that road. Where the fool just says, well, that's them, I'm me, this is my life, I'm going to live it the way I want. And they end up going down that same road that everyone else gets hurt doing. And that last line about complacency, they just kind of go along with the flow. But if you heed wisdom, that your life, it's not going to be void of trouble, but I think that your reputation will stay intact and that you'll live confidently and in good relationship with God.
That's good. Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you.
I was listening to all of you, and I work from home, so I'm a remote worker. So I'm pretty much 24/7 by myself, and I don't I'm actually not among people, so when you were saying, you have to be among people occasionally, but I'm on the phone a lot. I deal with workers' compensation, so I deal with injured workers. So, my opportunity is more by phone and not in person. To help people or encourage them and things like that. Or just be kind because they've been injured. Men especially, when they get injured at work and suddenly they are unable to provide for their family, get very sometimes angry and difficult to deal with. And you just have to learn how to talk with them and to encourage them and things like that. So I get to do it on a verbal side, but not really one-on-one with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. I mean, I would encourage you to get out and, be among people physically as much as you can also. I'm in a similar situation. I also work from home. And being in IT, I don't spend a lot of time even on the phone with people. I actually manage.
You leave us on hold forever. Every time I call my IT department, it's 30, 40, 50 minutes of.
Yeah, well, what's actually happening there is your IT department is on the phone with me while you're on hold.
That's true.
And then the question is, in what country are you in right now?
Mm-hmm. I deal with Microsoft on a regular basis. I have to talk to their IT department, and that could be a challenge.
But you are true, because I didn't always work from home. I've been in my career for 42 years, and it used to be, among people, but the world now is more and more homework, And I don't have a fellowship to come to here. So, it's Zooming is my gathering and my fellowship.
Yeah.
And